In the vast expanse of the Galactic Council, where 1,000 species bow to ancient bloodlines and rigid hierarchies, one truth remained absolute: the childless are powerless. When Princess Zara-Th of the mighty Veltar Empire failed to produce an heir after 3 centuries of life, her own family cast her into the darkest corner of known space, a primitive world called Earth, inhabited by short-lived mammals who somehow survived without proper genetic enhancement or noble breeding. They expected her to die forgotten among the humans, her royal blood wasted on barbarian soil. They never imagined that in learning to love these inferior beings, she would discover something her advanced civilization had long forgotten: that strength doesn't come from bloodlines or technology, but from the fierce bonds we choose to forge. And, when she returns to reclaim what was stolen from her, she won't come alone. The galaxy thought they knew what power looked like. They were about to learn the true meaning of human family. The transport ship shuddered as it broke through Earth's atmosphere, its alien hull screaming against air molecules that had never felt the touch of Veltar technology. Princess Zara-Th pressed her elongated fingers against the viewport, watching the blue and green world grow larger below her. 317 years of life, and this would be her tomb. The ship's captain, a scarred veteran of the border wars, avoided her gaze as he spoke. "Your Highness, we reached the designated coordinates in 10 minutes. The Council's orders are specific." Zara-Th didn't turn from the window. Her violet skin had paled to a sickly lavender since the trial began, and her usually pristine silver hair hung in tangles around her shoulders. "Speak plainly, Captain. You're to dump me on this primitive world and leave me to die. The great shame of the Veltar Empire, the princess who failed in her most basic duty. Majesty, perhaps if you had chosen a mate from the approved bloodlines, I chose love over duty once." Her reflection in the viewport showed eyes like burning stars, but now they held only ash. Lord Kethran was everything our people valued. Strong, fertile, from an ancient house. And I spent 2 centuries trying to bear his children while he took mistress after mistress, claiming the fault was mine. She touched her abdomen unconsciously. When the medical scanners finally revealed the truth, that his genetic line was corrupted by inbreeding, he had me declared barren to save his reputation. The captain's mandibles clicked in discomfort. Politics of the royal house were dangerous waters, especially when the current emperor was Kethran's younger brother. "The humans below," Zara-Th continued, "what do your scans tell you of them?" "Primitive mammals, Majesty. Short lifespans, no significant technology. They fight among themselves constantly and have barely begun to explore their own star system. The atmosphere is breathable for our kind, but the gravity is heavy, and their sun's radiation is intense." "How long do they live?" "Perhaps 80 to 100 of their years. A brief flicker compared to our millennium lifespans." Zara-Th finally turned from the window. Despite her disgrace, she still carried herself with royal bearing, shoulders back, chin high, every movement precise and controlled. "And they reproduce?" "Like vermin, Majesty. Their population numbers in the billions despite their short lives and lack of genetic optimization. They seem to mate based on emotion rather than genetic compatibility." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "How wonderfully primitive. To choose mates based on feeling rather than duty." The ship's sensors chimed, indicating their descent toward a massive landmass covered in lights. Even from this height, the evidence of human civilization was clear: sprawling cities, networks of roads, the geometric patterns of organized agriculture. "This is not the barren world the Council described," Zara-Th observed. The captain checked his instruments, mandibles clicking rapidly in confusion. The intelligence reports stated this was a pre-industrial world with scattered tribes. "Those reports were filed 600 years ago," Zara-Th said dryly. "Apparently, these short-lived humans have been busy." The ship touched down in a field of grain that stretched to the horizon, the golden stalks waving in an evening breeze. Through the viewport, Zara-Th could see lights in the distance, a settlement of some kind. The ship's environmental systems analyzed the air and declared it safe, though thick with unfamiliar scents. "Your Majesty," the captain said, his voice heavy with reluctance, "the Council's orders state that you are to be provided with minimal survival supplies and left to adapt to local conditions." "You mean left to die with dignity," Zara-Th corrected. "Very well. Open the cargo bay." The captain hesitated. Majesty, there are protocols for royal exile. You should know that any attempt to leave this world will result in the immediate destruction of any vessel that aids you. The entire system is monitored. Zara-Th studied the young officer. Despite his scarred appearance, he couldn't be more than 2 centuries old, barely an adult by Veltar standards. What's your name, Captain? Velosh, Majesty. Third son of House Corthane. Tell me, Velosh of House Corthane, do you have children? His mandibles snapped shut. Among the Veltar, that was an intensely personal question, especially when asked by royalty. I thought not, Zara-Th said gently. You're too young, and your house is minor nobility. You haven't been assigned a mate by the council yet. She moved toward the cargo bay. Here's something to consider during your long journey back to the Empire. You're ferrying a princess to her death because she couldn't produce heirs, while millions of our people remain unmated because they lack the proper bloodlines. Perhaps the problem isn't with the individuals, but with the system. The cargo bay opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Zara-Th stepped to the threshold, breathing alien air for the first time. It was warm and humid, carrying scents of growing things and rich earth. So different from the recycled atmosphere of Veltar ships and stations. The supplies, Majesty, Velosh said, directing his crew to unload a small container. It contained basic survival gear, some rations, and a translator device enough to perhaps survive a few weeks if she was lucky. Zara-Th picked up the container with ease despite Earth's heavier gravity. Her people were strong, adapted to high-gravity worlds and harsh conditions. This soft, green world would not kill her quickly. Captain, she said as the crew prepared to depart, when you return to the Empire, tell my father that his daughter understands the lesson he wished to teach. That bloodlines matter more than individuals, and that the good of the state outweighs personal desires. She paused, looking up at the alien stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Also tell him that sometimes, the greatest lessons are learned by those who are forced to start over with nothing. Velosh saluted, though his expression was troubled. It shall be done, Majesty. The ship lifted off, its engines disturbing the grain field as it rose toward the stars. Zara-Th watched until it became just another point of light, then turned toward the distant settlement. The translator device was already analyzing radio transmissions from the humans, parsing their languages and customs. As she walked through the grain field, her boots crushing the stalks beneath her feet, she began to understand why this world had been chosen for her exile. It was beautiful in a way that Veltar worlds, with their engineered perfection, could never be. Everything here was organic, chaotic, alive in ways that defied logic and planning. The settlement ahead was larger than she had first thought. Through the translator, she could hear fragments of human communication, something called television broadcasting entertainment, radio signals carrying music, and the chatter of what the device identified as internet traffic. These humans were far from primitive. The field ended at a road made of some black substance, smooth and well-maintained. Strange wheeled vehicles moved along it at remarkable speeds, their occupants apparently unconcerned by the danger. As Zara-Th approached the road, one of the vehicles slowed and stopped. A human male emerged from the vehicle. He was tall for his species, though still shorter than Zara-Th's 7-foot frame. His skin was dark, his hair black and curly, and his clothes were simple but clean. Most remarkably, he showed no fear at the sight of her obviously alien appearance. "Ma'am," he said, and the translator rendered his words in perfect Veltar, "you look lost. This is pretty far from town to be walking, especially in the dark." Zara-Th studied him carefully. According to her people's intelligence, humans were supposed to be primitive, violent, and xenophobic. This individual appeared to be none of those things. "I am traveling," she said carefully, testing the translator's ability to convert her words to his language. "Well, traveling can be dangerous out here at night. We've got coyotes, and there's a storm coming in from the west." He gestured to clouds building on the horizon. "Name's David Martinez. I run a farm about 5 miles from here. You're welcome to shelter for the night if you need it." The casual offer of hospitality to a complete stranger, an obviously alien stranger, left Zara-Th momentarily speechless. In the Veltar Empire, such generosity would be seen as either weakness or a calculated political move. I have no currency of your world, she said finally. David laughed, a warm sound that seemed to come from his chest. Didn't ask for payment. Sometimes people need help, and sometimes we're the ones who can provide it. That's how communities work. Communities? Groups of people who look out for each other. Neighbors, friends, family. He opened the door of his vehicle. Come on, Mrs. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. I am called Zara Th. Zara. That's pretty. Hop in, Zara. Rosa's making tamales tonight, and there's always enough for one more. As Zara Th climbed into the human vehicle, she wondered if the council had made a mistake in their choice of Exile World. These humans seemed to possess something that her advanced civilization had lost somewhere in its pursuit of genetic perfection and rigid social order. The vehicle moved quickly along the road, and David filled the silence with casual conversation about weather, crops, and local events. He didn't press her for information about her origins or her strange appearance. Through the windshield, she could see more evidence of human civilization, lights scattered across the landscape, the geometric patterns of organized agriculture, signs of a complex and thriving society. You're not from around here, are you? David asked eventually. No, Zara Th replied carefully. I come from very far away. Immigration's tough these days. Lot of paperwork, lot of waiting. System's broken if you ask me. People are people, regardless of where they come from. The translator was working overtime to parse concepts it had never encountered: immigration, paperwork, systems that could be broken and, presumably, fixed. The humans seemed to live in a constant state of change and adaptation that would have horrified the rigid bureaucrats of the Veltar Empire. They turned onto a smaller road that led toward a cluster of lights in the distance. As they approached, Zara Th could see a collection of buildings surrounding a central courtyard, clearly a family compound of some kind. Humans of various ages moved between the buildings, and the air was filled with the sounds of conversation and laughter. Big family, David explained, noticing her attention. My parents, my brother and his wife, my sister and her kids, a few cousins. We all work the farm together. It's been in the Martinez family for 4 generations now. 4 generations. By Veltar standards, that was barely a blink of time, yet these humans spoke of it as a grand legacy. Their short lives seemed to make every moment, every relationship, more precious rather than less. The vehicle stopped in the courtyard, and David called out in what the translator identified as Spanish. A woman emerged from the largest building, wiping her hands on an apron. She was shorter than David, with gray streaks in her black hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. David, who's your friend? She asked, switching to English as she approached. Found her walking on Route 7, Mama. This is Zara. Zara, this is my mother, Rosa Martinez. Rosa's eyes took in Zara Th's unusual height, violet skin, and silver hair without a flicker of fear or disgust. Instead, she clucked her tongue in motherly concern. Mija, you look exhausted. And hungry. Come, let's get you fed and somewhere safe to sleep. Before Zara Th could protest, Rosa had taken her arm and was leading her toward the house. The casual physical contact was startling in Veltar culture. Touching someone without permission, especially across class lines, was a serious breach of protocol. The interior of the house was warm and filled with rich scents that made Zara Th's stomach clench with sudden hunger. The rations she had eaten on the transport ship seemed like a distant memory. Rosa led her to a large room where a massive table was surrounded by chairs of various sizes, clearly designed to accommodate a large family. Sit, Rosa insisted, pressing Zara Th into a chair. David, go tell everyone we have a guest. And, wash your hands. As David disappeared into the house, Rosa bustled around the kitchen, assembling a plate of food that smelled absolutely divine. The translator was working frantically to identify the various dishes, but Zara Th found herself more interested in Rosa's constant stream of chatter. You're very tall, aren't you? And so pale. Are you from one of those northern countries? My cousin Maria married a man from Norway, and he was very pale too, but not as tall as you. And your hair. It's beautiful, like silver silk. Is that natural, or do you use some kind of treatment? The questions came without pause, but not in an intrusive way. Rosa seemed genuinely interested in Zara Th as a person, not as a potential threat or political opportunity. Other family members began filing into the room: an older man who was clearly David's father, a younger couple with two small children, a teenage girl with David's same warm eyes. Each was introduced with casual affection, and each accepted Zara Th's presence without question. "Papa," Rosa said to her husband, "this is Zara." David found her on the road. Papa Martinez, a weathered man with kind hands and David's same easy smile, nodded respectfully. "Welcome to our home, Miss Zara. Any friend of David's is family here." Family. The word kept appearing in their speech, but not in the way Zara Th understood it. In Veltar culture, family meant bloodlines, inheritance rights, political alliances. Here, it seemed to mean something broader and more inclusive. The meal that followed was unlike anything in Zara Th's experience. The food was simple but delicious, prepared with care and love rather than culinary artistry. More importantly, the conversation flowed freely across generations and topics. The children asked innocent questions about her appearance, which she answered vaguely. The adults discussed local events, crops, weather, and family news with equal interest. No one pressed her for details about her background or her obvious alienness. No one seemed to find it strange that a 7-foot-tall woman with violet skin and silver hair had appeared on their rural road. They simply accepted her presence and made her feel welcome. As the evening wore on, Zara Th found herself relaxing for the first time in months. The constant tension of palace politics, the humiliation of the trial, the fear and anger of exile, all of it seemed to fade in the warm glow of the Martinez family kitchen. "You look tired, Mija," Rosa observed as the younger family members began clearing the table. "David, show her to the guest room. And make sure there are extra blankets. She's so thin, she must get cold easily." The guest room was small but comfortable, with a bed covered in handmade quilts and windows that looked out over the farm. David showed her where the bathroom was and made sure she had everything she needed for the night. "Thank you," Zara Th said as he prepared to leave. "Your kindness to a stranger is unexpected." David paused in the doorway. "My grandmother used to say that we're all just strangers who haven't been introduced yet. Besides, everyone needs help sometimes. Tonight it's you, tomorrow it might be me." After he left, Zara Th sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process what she had experienced. In a single evening, this human family had shown her more genuine warmth and acceptance than she had received from her own people in decades. No political calculations, no genetic assessments, no careful maneuvering for advantage. Just simple human kindness. Through the window, she could see the stars, the same stars that shone on the Veltar Empire, where her father sat on his crystal throne and her former mate enjoyed his new wife and the children she had given him. They thought they had condemned her to death among savages. Perhaps they had instead given her the greatest gift possible, a chance to learn what it truly meant to be alive. As sleep finally claimed her, Zara Th found herself wondering what tomorrow would bring in this strange new world where family was chosen rather than born, and where kindness was given freely to strangers under alien stars. 3 months had passed since Zara Th's exile began, and she was learning that humans were far more complex than any Veltar intelligence report had suggested. What the Empire had dismissed as primitive chaos, she now recognized as beautiful diversity. Every human she met approached life differently, yet they somehow managed to work together in ways that defied her understanding of social organization. The Martinez family had never questioned her decision to stay. When she expressed uncertainty about her plans, Rosa had simply said, "Stay as long as you need, Mija. The guest room isn't going anywhere." It was that simple acceptance that had broken through centuries of royal protocol and rigid expectations. Now, as dawn broke over the farm, Zara Th was already in the fields, her alien strength making quick work of repairs to irrigation lines that would have taken the human workers all day. She had insisted on contributing to the household, and the family had gratefully accepted her help while carefully avoiding questions about her unusual abilities. "Zara!" David called from the edge of the field. "Breakfast is ready, and Papa wants to talk to you about something." She straightened, wiping sweat from her brow. The work felt good, honest labor that produced tangible results rather than the endless political maneuvering of court life. Her hands, once soft from a lifetime of luxury, now bore calluses from farm work. Her violet skin had darkened to a deeper purple from exposure to Earth's sun, and her silver hair had grown wild and untamed. The transformation went deeper than appearance. The constant tension that had defined her existence in the Empire was slowly fading. Here, among the humans, she was learning to laugh again. To speak without calculating every word for political implications. To enjoy simple pleasures like Rosa's cooking or watching the children play in the courtyard. In the kitchen, the family was gathered around the breakfast table as usual. Papa Martinez looked up as she entered, his weathered face serious but kind. "Sit down, Zara," he said gently. "We need to discuss your situation." Fear clutched at her chest, the old reflex of a royal who had learned that serious conversations usually meant exile, punishment, or worse. "Have I done something wrong?" "Wrong?" Rosa laughed, bringing a plate of eggs and fresh tortillas to the table. "Mija, you've been a blessing to this family. But we're worried about you." Papa Martinez leaned forward, his farmer's hands folded on the table. "You've been here 3 months, and we still don't know anything about you. Where you come from, why you were walking alone on that road, whether you have family looking for you. More importantly," David added, "you don't have any identification, social security number, or legal status. If immigration services find you, there could be serious problems." The translator worked to parse these unfamiliar concepts. Social security, immigration services, legal status, bureaucratic constructs that seemed designed to track and control human movement. Yet another way these supposedly primitive beings had created complex systems that the Empire had never imagined. "I cannot return to where I came from," Zarath said carefully. "It is very far away, and I am no longer welcome there." Rosa reached across the table and patted her hand. "Political refugee? I've seen the news, Mija. The world is full of people running from bad situations. But, here in America, we have laws to protect people like you. The thing is," Papa Martinez continued, "to get you proper documentation, we need to know more about your background. Even if we can't contact your home country, we need something to work with." David studied her face with the same careful attention he paid to his crops. "You're not exactly typical, are you, Zara? I mean, your height, your strength, the way you sometimes use words like you're translating from another language. And you've never used a cell phone, or watched television, or recognized half the foods Mom cooks." The moment she had been dreading had finally arrived. For 3 months, the Martinez family had sheltered and fed her without asking difficult questions. Now those questions could no longer be avoided. "What if I told you that I come from a place so distant that it would be impossible for your immigration services to verify my background?" she asked quietly. "Mexico?" Rosa suggested hopefully. "Central America? I know the crossing can be dangerous, and sometimes people lose their papers." "Much farther than that," Zarath said. She stood and walked to the window, looking up at the morning sky. "What if I told you that I come from among the stars themselves?" The silence that followed was not the shocked disbelief she had expected. Instead, she heard the scrape of chairs as the family members exchanged glances. "That would explain a lot," David said finally. "The way you talk about human customs like you're learning them for the first time. Your strength, I've seen you lift irrigation pipes that should require 3 men to move. The way you always know exactly which direction is north, even in the dark." "You think I'm insane," Zarath said, still facing the window. "Mija," Rosa said gently, "I've lived 67 years on this earth. I've seen enough to know that there are more things in this world than most people want to admit. If you're telling us you're from space, well, stranger things have happened." Papa Martinez stood and joined her at the window. "The question isn't whether we believe you. The question is what we do about it. Because whatever you are, wherever you come from, you're family now. And family takes care of each other." The simplicity of his acceptance brought tears to her eyes, the first tears she had shed since her exile began. In the Veltar Empire, family was about bloodlines and genetic compatibility. Here, it was about choice and caring. "My people," she began, then stopped. How could she explain the rigid hierarchy of the empire, the importance of bloodlines, the shame of her barrenness. How could she make them understand that she had been cast out like garbage because she couldn't fulfill her biological purpose? "Take your time," David said. "We've got all day, and Mom's got enough coffee to last until dinner." So she told them. Not everything, some truths were too painful, and others might put them in danger, but enough. She spoke of a great empire among the stars, of a princess who failed in her duty, of exile to a world her people considered primitive. She spoke of expecting to die alone among savages, only to find kindness beyond anything her advanced civilization could imagine. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Finally, Rosa spoke. "So you're a princess?" "A former princess. Now I'm just Zara." "Well," Rosa said practically, "princess or not, you still need proper documentation if you're going to stay in this country." "And I'm assuming you want to stay?" The question caught her off guard. Did she want to stay? The thought of leaving this warm, chaotic, loving family was almost unbearable. But what future could she have here? She was an alien exile with no money, no legal identity, and no skills beyond royal protocol and farm work. "I would like to stay," she admitted. "But I don't know how that's possible." David leaned back in his chair, the same expression on his face that he wore when planning crop rotations or solving mechanical problems. "Actually, it might be easier than you think. My cousin Elena is an immigration lawyer in San Antonio. She specializes in complex cases, people who've lost documentation due to wars, natural disasters, government persecution. We could say you're from a remote region where record-keeping is poor," Papa Martinez suggested. "Somewhere that's had political upheaval. Elena has helped people in similar situations before." "You would do this for me?" Zara Th asked. "Risk legal complications to help someone you've known for only 3 months? "Mija," Rosa said, refilling her coffee cup, "you think 3 months isn't long enough to know someone's heart?" "I knew David's father was a good man after 3 weeks, and I married him. I knew his children would be wonderful after 3 minutes of watching him with his nieces and nephews. Time isn't what matters, it's how people behave when they think no one important is watching." Over the following weeks, Elena Martinezjan proved to be as resourceful as her family had promised. A sharp-featured woman with kind eyes and David's same practical approach to problem-solving, she took Zara Th's case with enthusiasm rather than skepticism. "I've heard stranger stories," she said during their first meeting in her San Antonio office. "The world is full of people whose backgrounds don't fit neat bureaucratic categories. The key is finding a framework that works within the system." Elena had contacts in refugee resettlement organizations, connections with religious groups that sponsored asylum seekers, and a deep understanding of how to navigate bureaucratic complexity. Within a month, she had assembled a plausible background for Zara Th, a woman from a remote region of Central Asia, orphaned by political violence, who had lost all documentation during a harrowing escape. "The beauty of this approach," Elena explained, "is that it's essentially true. You are a refugee from political persecution, you have lost contact with your original home, and you are seeking asylum in a country that represents safety and opportunity." The process was slow and filled with paperwork, interviews, and bureaucratic delays. But the Martinez family supported her through every step, treating each small victory as a cause for celebration and each setback as a temporary obstacle to overcome. During this time, Zara Th continued to learn about human society. She discovered television and spent hours watching documentaries about Earth's history, amazed by the rapid pace of human technological and social development. In just a few centuries, these people had gone from horse-drawn carts to space exploration, from scattered tribes to global communication networks. She learned about human art, music, and literature, finding herself moved by creative expressions that spoke to emotions rather than logic. In the Veltar Empire, art served political or ceremonial purposes. Human art served the soul. Most importantly, she learned about human relationships. She watched David's sister Carmen navigate the complexities of raising teenage children, balancing firm guidance with loving support. She observed how Papa and Rosa Martinez had built a partnership over 4 decades, sharing responsibilities and decisions with easy familiarity. She saw how the extended family network functioned: cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends forming a web of mutual support that extended far beyond blood relations. When a neighbor's barn was damaged in a storm, the entire community turned out to help with repairs. When the local school needed volunteers for a fundraiser, the Martinez family pitched in without question. This was civilization in a form the Veltar had never imagined, not rigid hierarchy enforced by genetic breeding and military power, but flexible cooperation based on shared values and mutual care. The breakthrough in her legal status came 6 months after her arrival. Elena had found a precedent in refugee law that exactly fit Zarath's situation, and the immigration judge had granted her asylum pending full refugee status review. "Congratulations," Elena said, handing her the temporary documentation that would allow her to work legally and begin the process of permanent residency. "Welcome to America, officially." That evening, the Martinez family threw a party that filled the house with relatives, friends, and neighbors. Zarath found herself at the center of a celebration that felt more genuine than any state banquet she had attended as a princess. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, she sat on the porch with Rosa, watching fireflies dance in the warm summer air. "Regrets?" Rosa asked quietly. "About leaving my old life?" "No." Zarath paused, considering. "But I do wonder sometimes about my people. Whether they might change if they could see what I've learned here." "Change is hard," Rosa said. "Especially when you're comfortable with the way things are. But sometimes it takes someone from outside to show us new possibilities." That night, as Zarath lay in her bed, no longer a guest room but truly her room, she thought about the future for the first time since her exile began. She had legal status now, the protection of American law, and the support of a family that had chosen to love her. But she also had something else, a growing understanding of what her people had lost in their pursuit of genetic perfection and rigid order. The humans, with their short lives and chaotic emotions, had achieved something the millennium-old Veltar Empire had never managed: a society based on inclusion rather than exclusion, cooperation rather than competition. As sleep took her, she wondered if there might be a way to share that knowledge. Not by returning to claim her stolen throne, but by proving that there was another way to build a civilization. A way that valued every individual, regardless of their genetic heritage or biological function. A way that understood that the strongest families were not those bound by blood, but those bound by choice and love. 2 years had transformed Zarath's life in ways she could never have imagined. The alien princess who had been dumped in a Texas grain field was gone, replaced by someone who felt genuinely human despite her obvious physical differences. She had a job now, working as a mechanical engineer for an agricultural equipment company in San Antonio, her alien intelligence and strength making her invaluable in designing and testing machinery that could withstand the demanding conditions of large-scale farming. The work fascinated her. Human engineering was elegant in its simplicity, focusing on practical solutions rather than the overwrought complexity favored by Veltar designers. Every day brought new challenges and opportunities to apply her advanced knowledge to help improve life for ordinary farmers like the Martinez family. But the most important change in her life had nothing to do with work or legal status. It had to do with the man sitting across from her in the small restaurant where they had shared countless dinners over the past year. Dr. Marcus Webb was not what anyone would have expected the former princess of a galactic empire to fall in love with. He was a pediatrician at the local children's hospital, soft-spoken and gentle, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and hands that seemed made for healing rather than conquest. He was also completely ordinary by Veltar standards: average height, average build, with graying brown hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent laughing with children and comforting worried parents. "You're staring again," Marcus said with a smile, looking up from his dinner. "Sorry," Zarath replied, though she wasn't sorry at all. Even after a year together, she still marveled at how this quiet, compassionate man had captured her heart so completely. "I was just thinking about how different things are now compared to when I first arrived." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. His was warm and calloused from years of work, so different from the soft, pampered hands of Veltar nobles. "Better different, I hope?" "Infinitely better." She squeezed his hand, still amazed by how natural the gesture had become. Physical affection had been rare in the Veltar court, carefully regulated by protocol and political calculation. With Marcus, touch was a language of love rather than a statement of power. They had met at the hospital during a volunteer orientation session that Rosa had convinced her to attend. "You need to get out more, Mija," Rosa had said. "Meet people your own age, make friends outside the family." The irony wasn't lost on Zara. At 300 years old, she was ancient by human standards, yet Rosa was right that she needed to expand her social circle. Marcus had been leading a group of volunteers through the pediatric ward, explaining how they could help comfort children undergoing treatment. Zara had watched him interact with a young girl receiving chemotherapy, his patience infinite as he answered her questions about why her hair was falling out and when she could go home. The genuine care in his voice, the way he knelt down to meet the child at eye level, the respect he showed for her fears and hopes, it had reminded Zara of everything she had found to love about humanity. Their first conversation had been about children, naturally. Marcus had noticed how easily she connected with the young patients, how her unusual appearance seemed to fascinate rather than frighten them. "You're wonderful with kids," he had said as they walked to the parking garage after her first volunteer shift. "Do you have children of your own?" The question had hit her like a physical blow. In the Veltar Empire, her inability to bear children had been her greatest shame, the source of her exile and disgrace. But something about Marcus's gentle manner had made her answer honestly. "No," she had said simply. "I can't have children." Instead of the pity or disappointment she expected, Marcus had simply nodded with understanding. "I'm sorry if that's something you wanted. For what it's worth, there are a lot of children in this world who need love and care, regardless of whose DNA they carry." That casual acceptance of her infertility, the suggestion that motherhood could mean more than biological reproduction, had been the beginning of everything. Now, as they finished dinner and walked hand in hand through the warm San Antonio evening, Zara reflected on how their relationship had deepened. Marcus had never pressed her for details about her background, accepting Elena's carefully crafted refugee story without question. He seemed to understand intuitively that some truths were too painful to share casually. But tonight felt different. There was something in Marcus's manner, a nervous energy that reminded her of the day he had first asked her out. He had been adorably awkward then, stumbling over his words as he suggested they have dinner together as friends, of course, but maybe friends who might potentially be interested in exploring whether friendship could develop into something more. "Marcus," she said as they reached her apartment building, "you're being unusually quiet tonight. Is everything all right?" He stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands trembling slightly as he reached into his jacket pocket. "Actually, I've been thinking about something for a while now. About us, about the future, about what it means to build a family." Zara's breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box. Even in her alien culture, she recognized the significance of the gesture. "Zara," Marcus said, dropping to one knee right there on the sidewalk, "I know we haven't been together very long by some standards. And I know there are things about your past that you're not ready to share, and that's okay. But I also know that you're the kindest, strongest, most compassionate person I've ever met. You make me want to be better than I am." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a modest diamond that caught the streetlight. "I know you can't have biological children, and I want you to know that doesn't matter to me. There are so many ways to build a family, so many children who need homes and love. If you'll have me, I'd like to explore those possibilities together." Tears streamed down her violet cheeks as she looked at this wonderful, ordinary human man who was offering her everything her people had told her she could never have: love, partnership, family on terms that had nothing to do with bloodlines or genetic compatibility. "Marcus," she whispered, "there are things about me that you don't know. Things that might change how you feel." "Are you a good person who tries to help others?" he asked. "I try to be." "Do you love me?" "More than I thought possible." "Then, everything else is just details we can work through together." He smiled up at her. "So what do you say? Will you marry me?" The word yes came out as a sob of pure joy as she pulled him to his feet and into her arms. The ring slipped onto her finger as if it had been made for her, and Marcus kissed her with all the passion and gentleness that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. As they held each other on that ordinary San Antonio street, Zara realized that she had found something the Veltar Empire had never taught her was possible: happiness that didn't depend on status, achievement, or genetic perfection. Just two people choosing to love each other and build something beautiful together. The wedding planning that followed was a revelation in human culture. In the Veltar Empire, royal marriages were state occasions involving months of protocol negotiations, formal ceremonies, and political alliances. Human weddings, she discovered, were about celebration and community. Rosa Martinez immediately appointed herself as unofficial wedding coordinator, despite having no blood relation to either bride or groom. "You don't have family here, Mija," she said when Zara Th tried to politely decline her help. "So we'll be your family. Besides, I've been planning weddings for 40 years. My children, my nieces and nephews, the neighbors' kids, I know what I'm doing." Marcus's family proved equally welcoming. His parents, retired teachers from Minneapolis, flew down to meet their son's unusual fiancée with curiosity rather than judgment. His sister Sarah, a social worker from Denver, immediately bonded with Zara Th over their shared interest in helping others. "You know," Sarah said during the engagement party Rosa insisted on throwing, "Marcus has always been attracted to strong, independent women. His last serious relationship was with a trauma surgeon who spoke 4 languages and ran marathons in her spare time. I think he has a type." "Strong, independent women?" Zara Th asked. "Women who could probably kick his ass if they wanted to," Sarah laughed. "But who choose to be gentle with him instead. He appreciates that combination." The comment struck home. In the Veltar Empire, strength was about dominance and competition. Among humans, she was learning that true strength often meant choosing kindness when you had the power to choose otherwise. The wedding itself was held at the Martinez farm, in the same courtyard where Zara Th had first experienced human hospitality. The ceremony was officiated by the local parish priest, Father Miguel, who had somehow managed to perform a meaningful religious service while carefully avoiding any theological complications about alien souls or interspecies marriage. As Zara Th walked down the makeshift aisle between rows of folding chairs, she was struck by the faces looking back at her. The Martinez family sat in the front row, beaming with pride as if she were their own daughter. Marcus's colleagues from the hospital filled several rows, many of whom she had come to know through volunteer work. Neighbors, friends, and extended family members from both families filled the remaining seats. None of them were there for political reasons or social advantage. They were there simply because they cared about Marcus and Zara Th and wanted to celebrate their happiness. It was a level of genuine affection that no Veltar royal wedding had ever achieved. Marcus stood at the altar in his simple black suit, tears already streaming down his face as he watched her approach. His best man, his younger brother Tom, kept a steadying hand on his shoulder. Father Miguel smiled benevolently over his prayer book. When she reached the altar and took Marcus's hands, Zara Th felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This was what the poets talked about when they spoke of finding your other half, though she suspected they had never imagined it could happen between species. The vows they exchanged were simple but profound. Marcus promised to love and support her regardless of what the future might bring, to be patient with her past and excited about their shared tomorrow. Zara Th promised to be worthy of his trust, to build with him the kind of family that chose love over convenience and inclusion over tradition. When Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife and Marcus kissed her for the first time as her spouse, the cheer that went up from the assembled crowd was genuine joy rather than polite applause. The reception that followed was pure human celebration, music, dancing, speeches both heartfelt and hilarious, and enough food to feed twice the number of guests. David Martinez had set up a sound system in the courtyard, and the dance floor quickly filled with couples of all ages swaying to everything from traditional Mexican ballads to contemporary pop music. Zara Th danced with her new husband, with Papa Martinez who welcomed her officially to the family, with Dr. Peterson who had hired her at the agricultural equipment company, and with dozens of other people who had become part of her chosen family over the past 2 years. But the most meaningful dance was with 8-year-old Sophia, Carmen's youngest daughter, who had appointed herself as unofficial flower girl and junior wedding coordinator. "Tia Zara," Sophia said as they swayed to a slow song, "are you and Uncle Marcus going to have babies now?" The question that had once been a source of shame and pain no longer carried the same sting. "We're going to have a family, Mija. Maybe not babies that come from my body, but children who need parents to love them." "Like adoption?" Sophia asked with the matter-of-fact wisdom of children. Like adoption. There are a lot of kids who need homes. Sophia considered this seriously. That's good. Some of my friends at school are adopted, and their families love them just the same as if they came from their parents' bellies. Out of the mouths of babes, Zarath thought. This child understood something that the advanced Veltar civilization had never grasped, that love was what made a family, not genetics. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Zarath and Marcus sat on the porch swing where she had spent so many quiet moments with Rosa, processing the overwhelming kindness of human culture. Any regrets? Marcus asked, echoing Rosa's question from their first night together. About marrying you? Never. She leaned against his shoulder, marveling at how perfectly they fit together despite their physical differences. About leaving my old life? Also never. What was your old life like? Marcus asked gently. I know it's painful to talk about, but I'd like to understand what you're running from. For a moment, Zarath considered telling him everything about the Veltar Empire, about her royal birth, about the genetic obsessions that had led to her exile. But the truth was too dangerous, too likely to draw attention from forces that could destroy this peaceful life they were building together. I was born into a very rigid society, she said carefully. One that valued genetic heritage over individual worth, that measured people's value by their ability to produce children, that cast out anyone who couldn't fit their narrow definitions of success. Marcus was quiet for a long time, his arm tightening around her shoulders. That sounds incredibly painful. I'm sorry you had to grow up in that kind of environment. It was what I knew, so I thought it was normal. It took coming here, meeting your family and Rosa's family and all the wonderful people in this community, to understand that there were other ways to live. Better ways? Much better ways. She turned in his arms to face him. Ways that value kindness over strength, inclusion over purity, love over duty. Marcus kissed her forehead gently. Well, you're stuck with our way now. For better or worse, as we just promised. Definitely for better, Zarath murmured against his chest. As they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear in the clear Texas sky, Zarath thought about the future that stretched ahead of them. Tomorrow they would begin their married life, and soon they would start the process of adoption that would make them parents. They would raise children who would never know about genetic castes or biological destiny, children who would grow up understanding that families were built through love and choice rather than chance and obligation. It was a small victory against the rigid thinking of her birth culture, but it felt like the beginning of something larger. Every child they raised in love rather than duty, every example they set of inclusion over exclusion, every moment of joy they created in defiance of systems that valued power over happiness, it all mattered. The Veltar Empire had exiled her to punish her for failing to meet their genetic expectations. Instead, they had given her the opportunity to build something far more valuable than any royal bloodline, a family based on the revolutionary human idea that love was more powerful than genetics, that choice was more important than destiny. As Marcus dozed against her shoulder and the Texas night settled around them, Zarath made a silent promise to the stars that had witnessed her exile and now blessed her marriage. She would build a family so filled with love and acceptance that it would stand as proof that there was a better way to organize a civilization. A way that measured success not by genetic purity or royal bloodlines, but by the simple human values of kindness, inclusion, and chosen love. The princess was dead, but the woman who had taken her place was building something far more precious than any empire. 5 years had passed since Zarath first stepped off that alien transport ship, and the woman loading groceries into her minivan in the Walmart parking lot bore little resemblance to the broken princess who had expected to die among savages. Her silver hair was now pulled back in a practical ponytail, her violet skin had deepened to a rich purple from years under the Texas sun, and her clothes were the comfortable, practical garments of a busy mother rather than the flowing robes of royalty. "Mom, can we get ice cream on the way home?" asked 10-year-old Emma from the back seat, her dark eyes sparkling with hope. Emma had been their first adoption, a bright, energetic girl whose birth parents had been unable to care for her due to addiction issues. She had arrived at their home 3 years ago, suspicious and guarded, testing every boundary to see if these new parents would abandon her like all the others. "Ice cream sounds perfect," Zarath replied, checking the rearview mirror to make sure all 3 children were properly buckled in. "What do you think, guys?" 12-year-old David, named after David Martinez, who had become his honorary grandfather, pumped his fist in victory. He had come to them 2 years ago from foster care, a quiet boy who had learned not to expect too much from adults. His autism had made him difficult to place, but Marcus's medical background and Zaratich's infinite patience had helped him flourish in ways his previous placements had never imagined possible. 7-year-old Luis, their newest addition, was still adjusting to family life after spending his early years with a grandmother who had loved him fiercely but couldn't provide the stability he needed. He nodded enthusiastically at the ice cream suggestion, though he still sometimes seemed surprised when good things happened without a catch. As Zaratich navigated the familiar streets of their neighborhood, she marveled at how completely her life had changed. The house they had bought 2 years ago was a far cry from the crystal palaces of the Veltar Empire, a modest 4-bedroom ranch with a big backyard, bicycle storage in the garage, and a refrigerator covered with school artwork and family photos. Marcus was already home when they arrived, having finished his hospital shift early. He emerged from the garage where he had been working on David's science fair project, a motorized robot that could sort different colored blocks. The sight of him in his old jeans and paint-stained t-shirt, safety goggles pushed up on his forehead, still made her heart skip a beat. "How's the robot coming?" she asked, kissing him hello while the children thundered into the house. "David's a genius," Marcus replied with the pride of a father whose child had just discovered something wonderful about himself. "His pattern recognition abilities are incredible. This robot is going to blow the judges away." They had learned early in their relationship that parenting adopted children required a different approach than what either of them had experienced growing up. Each child came with their own trauma, their own learned behaviors, their own ways of testing whether this new family would really stick. It had required patience, creativity, and an absolute commitment to proving that love was not conditional on perfect behavior. Emma had been the most challenging at first, her abandonment issues manifesting in aggressive behavior and deliberate rule-breaking. But she had also been the most transformative for Zaratich, teaching her that being a mother had nothing to do with genetics and everything to do with showing up consistently, day after day, with love and boundaries in equal measure. David had taught her about the beauty of neurodiversity, about how brains that work differently could see patterns and solutions that neurotypical minds missed entirely. His quiet intensity and methodical approach to problems reminded her of the best aspects of Veltar intellectual culture, but without the rigid hierarchies and genetic prejudices. Luis was still teaching them both about resilience and the complicated process of learning to trust. His easy laughter and affectionate nature had been gifts that he shared carefully, making each hug and spontaneous "I love you" feel like a precious achievement. Dinner that evening was the usual chaos of a family with 3 children, homework questions mixed with discussions of weekend plans, negotiations over vegetables, and the running commentary that Emma provided on every aspect of her day. Zaratich had once dined at formal state banquets with hundreds of guests, but she had never experienced anything as satisfying as these noisy family meals. "Mom," Emma said as she stabbed her broccoli with theatrical disgust, "Sarah's mom said you're from Russia." "But you don't have a Russian accent." Zaratich and Marcus exchanged glances. They had agreed early in their relationship to be as honest with the children as possible while still protecting them from dangerous truths. The carefully constructed refugee story had satisfied government agencies, but their sharp, observant children required more nuanced explanations. "I'm from very far away," Zaratich said carefully. "A place that doesn't exist anymore the way it used to. Sometimes when people leave their home countries because of war or persecution, they try to blend in with their new culture. They change the way they talk, the way they dress, even the way they think about things. Like how Abuelo Martinez still speaks Spanish when he's excited, but he's been in America for 50 years? David asked. Exactly like that. People carry their old cultures inside them, but they also become part of their new homes. Luis, who had been quiet through most of dinner, suddenly spoke up. "Is that why you understand what it's like when people don't want you? Because your old family didn't want you either?" The question hit Zaratich like a physical blow. The perception of children, their ability to see through adult complications to the emotional truth underneath, never ceased to amaze her. "Yes," she said simply. "My birth family had very strict ideas about what people should be like, and I didn't fit their expectations. So they sent me away." "That's stupid," Emma declared with characteristic bluntness. You're the best mom ever. Their loss. Thank you, Nija. But I think everything worked out the way it was supposed to. If they hadn't sent me away, I never would have met Dad, and we never would have become a family. So sometimes bad things happen so good things can happen later? Luis asked, working through the logic with the careful attention of a child who had experienced enough bad things to be suspicious of simple answers. Sometimes, Marcus said gently. But, more importantly, sometimes we can choose to make good things happen even after bad things have hurt us. Like how you three chose to let us be your parents even though other adults had let you down before. That night, after the children were finally asleep and the dishwasher was humming through its cycle, Zara Th and Marcus sat on their back porch watching fireflies dance in the summer darkness. It was their ritual, this quiet time together after the chaos of family life had settled into peaceful exhaustion. Penny for your thoughts? Marcus asked, using the human expression he had taught her years ago. I was thinking about cycles, Zara Th said. How my people believe that bloodlines determine destiny, that genetic purity is the highest goal. And, here we are, raising three beautiful children who share no DNA with either of us, proving every day that love makes stronger families than biology ever could. Marcus reached for her hand. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if more people could see what we see. How much stronger our communities would be if we focused on caring for all children instead of just our biological offspring. In my birth culture, Zara Th said carefully, there are millions of people who are never allowed to have families because their genetics aren't considered valuable enough. Children who are raised in institutions because their bloodlines aren't pure. Brilliant minds wasted because they don't carry the right family names. That's heartbreaking. It's also incredibly wasteful. All that potential, all those possible contributions to society, dismissed because of arbitrary genetic prejudices. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of their suburban neighborhood air conditioners humming, a dog barking in the distance, the faint sound of laughter from a neighbor's backyard party. Do you ever think about going back? Marcus asked quietly. Not to stay, but to... I don't know, show them what you've learned here. The question had been lurking in the back of Zara Th's mind for months as their family had grown and flourished. She had built something beautiful here, something that stood as living proof that the Veltar Empire's genetic obsessions were not just wrong but actively harmful. I think about it, she admitted. But it would be incredibly dangerous. Not just for me, but for you and the children. My people have very little tolerance for alternative viewpoints. What if there was a way to share the message without exposing our family to danger? Zara Th turned to study her husband's face in the dim porch light. What are you thinking? I've been reading about some of the refugee advocacy work that's happening internationally. Organizations that help people tell their stories, that document human rights abuses, that create platforms for voices that might otherwise be silenced. Marcus leaned forward, his expression earnest. What if your story, not the alien princess part, but the human part, the story of building a family through love rather than genetics, what if that story could reach people who need to hear it? People trapped in systems that value bloodlines over individuals? It was a revolutionary thought, and a dangerous one. But, as Zara Th looked through the window at the house where their three children slept safely in beds surrounded by toys and books and evidence of unconditional love, she realized that Marcus was right. They had built something worth sharing, something that challenged the fundamental assumptions her birth culture was based on. It would have to be done very carefully, she said slowly. In ways that couldn't be traced back to us directly. Of course. I'm not talking about anything that would put our family at risk. But, maybe there are ways to plant seeds. To get ideas out into the universe that might take root in unexpected places. Over the following weeks, they began to explore possibilities. Marcus connected with colleagues who worked with international humanitarian organizations, people who understood the complexities of protecting vulnerable individuals while amplifying important messages. Elena Martinez-Chun, who had helped establish Zara Th's legal identity years earlier, proved invaluable in navigating the legal and ethical considerations. Anonymous testimony, she suggested during one of their consultations. Stories shared through intermediaries, with details changed to protect sources. It's done all the time in human rights documentation. Dr. Sarah Webb, Marcus's sister, who worked in international social services, had connections with organizations that specialized in alternative family structures and adoption advocacy. There's a growing movement around the idea that families of choice can be just as strong as families of origin, she told them during a video call. Your story, the refugee story, not the other details, could be incredibly powerful in that context. The project that emerged was subtle but potentially transformative. Working through a network of advocacy organizations, they began sharing carefully sanitized versions of their family's story, a refugee who had fled a culture that valued genetic purity over individual worth, who had found healing and purpose in building a family through adoption and love. The stories were published in academic journals, shared at conferences on international social work, and featured in documentaries about alternative family structures. Never with enough detail to trace back to their specific family, but always with the core message that love and choice could create families stronger than any genetic connection. 6 months into the project, they received feedback that surprised them both. The stories were resonating not just with human audiences, but with immigrant communities from cultures that emphasized bloodlines and genetic inheritance. Messages began arriving through the advocacy networks from people who had been inspired to challenge their own cultural assumptions about family and belonging. A young woman from a traditional society who had adopted children despite family pressure to wait for biological offspring. A couple who had embraced a child with developmental disabilities that their extended family had wanted them to institutionalize. A community that had begun supporting single mothers instead of shunning them for not conforming to traditional family structures. Each story was a small victory, a tiny crack in systems of thinking that valued genetic inheritance over individual worth. And, while Zara Th knew that her own people were unlikely to be directly reached by these human advocacy networks, she also understood that ideas had a way of traveling across unexpected channels. Do you think it's making a difference? Marcus asked one evening as they reviewed the latest batch of feedback messages. Maybe not in the way we originally imagined, Zara Th replied. But every mind that changes, every family that chooses love over convention, every community that expands its definition of belonging, it all matters. She looked around their living room, where homework was scattered across the coffee table and 3 pairs of sneakers lay abandoned by the front door. Emma's latest art project was taped to the refrigerator, David's robot parts were carefully organized on the dining room table, and Luis's collection of smooth rocks was displayed on the windowsill. It was beautifully, chaotically human. And it was proof that there was another way to build a civilization, not through genetic engineering and rigid hierarchies, but through the simple, revolutionary act of choosing to love people who needed families and creating space for everyone to belong. You know what I think? Marcus said, following her gaze around their cluttered, wonderful home. I think the most powerful message we can send isn't through advocacy organizations or academic papers. It's this. This family we've built, these children we're raising, this example we're setting every single day. 3 children who will grow up knowing that families are built through love, not genetics, Zara Th agreed. Who will carry that understanding into their own relationships and communities. And who will never accept systems that dismiss people based on arbitrary biological criteria. As if summoned by their conversation, Luis appeared in the living room doorway, rubbing his eyes sleepily. I had a bad dream, he said in the small voice he used when the past still haunted his sleep. Without hesitation, both parents moved to comfort him. Marcus scooped him up while Zara Th made space on the couch between them. Within minutes, the 7-year-old was fast asleep again, secure in the knowledge that his parents would protect him from nightmares both real and imagined. Holding her sleeping child, Zara Th realized that Marcus was absolutely right. The most powerful revolution they could stage against systems that valued genetics over love was simply this: a family that proved every day that chosen bonds were stronger than biological ones, that inclusion created more strength than exclusion, that love was the only qualification that mattered for building a future worth living in. The Veltar Empire had exiled her for failing to produce genetically pure offspring. Instead, they had enabled her to create something far more valuable, a family that would carry the seeds of change into the next generation, proving that there was a better way to organize society than through bloodlines and genetic castes. It was a quiet revolution, fought with bedtime stories and homework help rather than weapons and manifestos. But, as Zara Th watched her husband carry their sleeping son back to his bedroom, she knew it was the most important battle she had ever fought. 10 years. A decade of human life that had passed in the blink of an eye by Veltar standards, yet had contained more growth, love, and purpose than Zara Th's previous 3 centuries combined. She stood in her backyard garden, watching 18-year-old Emma help Luis, now 17, with his college application essays while 22-year-old David worked on his doctoral thesis in adaptive robotics at the picnic table nearby. The children she had raised were no longer children, but the bonds between them remained as strong as ever. Emma was heading to medical school in the fall, inspired by Marcus's example to dedicate her life to healing others. David had already been accepted into a prestigious PhD program, his autism-enhanced pattern recognition abilities making him a sought-after researcher in artificial intelligence. Luis was choosing between several college scholarships, his natural charisma and hard-won resilience making him a compelling candidate for programs in social work and community organizing. All 3 young adults carried within them the revolutionary understanding that families were built through choice and love rather than genetics. They had grown up in a household that celebrated neurodiversity, embraced different cultural backgrounds, and measured success by kindness rather than achievement. They were living proof that the Veltar Empire's genetic obsessions were not just wrong but actively harmful to society. Marcus emerged from the house carrying a pitcher of iced tea, his hair now completely gray but his smile unchanged. At 58, he moved with the careful precision of someone whose back protested long hours bent over hospital beds, but his dedication to his pediatric patients remained as strong as ever. Mail came, he said, setting the pitcher on the picnic table and pulling an official-looking envelope from his jacket pocket. This one's addressed specifically to you, no return address. Zara took the envelope with curiosity rather than concern. Over the years, their advocacy work had generated various correspondence from people inspired by their story or requesting advice about adoption and alternative families. But, as she opened the envelope and began reading the single sheet of paper inside, her blood turned cold. The letter was written in perfect formal Veltar, the ceremonial language used only for official communications within the Empire. Someone had found her. Princess Zara of House Velkath, the letter began, "Your presence is requested at coordinates that will be transmitted to your original communication device within the next solar rotation. A representative of the Galactic Council wishes to discuss matters of mutual interest regarding cultural exchange and diplomatic relations. Your current domestic arrangements will not be disturbed, and safe passage is guaranteed under the neutral meeting protocols. This communication is not a summons or a threat, but an invitation to dialogue." It was signed with the seal of the Council's Diplomatic Corps, an organization that handled first contact situations and interspecies negotiations. Somehow, someone in the Empire had not only discovered her location but had been monitoring her activities closely enough to understand that she had built a life worth protecting. Bad news? Marcus asked, noticing her expression. Zara looked around the garden at the family she had built, the life she had created, the small revolution she had been quietly leading for a decade. Emma was laughing at something Luis had written, her dark hair catching the afternoon sunlight. David was completely absorbed in his research, occasionally making notes in the precise handwriting he had developed to compensate for his fine motor challenges. Marcus was watching all of them with the contented expression of a man who had found his purpose in caring for others. "Possibly," she said quietly. "Someone from my past wants to meet." That evening, after the children had gone to their respective activities and the house had settled into its familiar evening rhythm, Zara told Marcus about the letter. She had kept her old communication device in a locked box in their bedroom closet, a reminder of her origins that she had never quite been able to discard. "Are you going to respond?" Marcus asked as they sat on their bed, the alien device humming softly between them as it displayed the coordinates and meeting details. "I don't know," Zara admitted. "Part of me is curious about what they want. But part of me is terrified that acknowledging this communication will somehow put our family in danger." "What does your gut tell you?" She considered the question carefully. "That this isn't random. Someone has been watching, learning, evaluating what I've built here. The fact that they mention cultural exchange and diplomatic relations suggests they've understood that our family represents something new." "New how?" "A successful model of society based on inclusion rather than genetic hierarchy. A family structure that creates stronger bonds than anything the Empire has achieved through centuries of selective breeding." Marcus was quiet for a long time, his medical training evident in how carefully he considered all the implications before speaking. If there's even a chance that our story could help change their society, don't you have an obligation to at least listen? Not if it puts our children at risk. What if we could ensure their safety first? What if this meeting could happen in a way that protects them while still allowing you to share what you've learned? 3 days later, Zara-TH stood in the same grain field where she had first set foot on Earth 10 years earlier. The coordinates had led her to a location just a few miles from the Martinez farm, the symbolic significance not lost on her. She had come full circle, but she was no longer the broken princess who had been dumped here to die. She was a mother, a wife, a member of a human community that had taught her what civilization truly meant. The ship that descended from the clear blue sky was unlike any Veltar vessel she had ever seen. Sleek and organic in design, it seemed to flow like liquid metal as it settled into the grain field. When the hatch opened, the being who emerged was not Veltar at all. They were tall and graceful, with skin that shifted between blue and green depending on the light, and eyes that held intelligence and kindness in equal measure. When they spoke, it was in perfect English with only the slightest accent. "Princess Zara-TH," they said with a respectful bow. "I am Ambassador Kalthara of the Jinti Coalition. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." Those Jinti. Zara-TH knew of them from her political education, an alliance of species that had broken away from the traditional Galactic Council structure decades ago, forming their own confederation based on different principles. "You're not from the Empire," she observed. "No, though we maintain diplomatic relations with all council members. We are here because your story has traveled farther than you might imagine." Ambassador Kalthara gestured toward the ship, and Zara-TH saw that Marcus was standing just inside the hatch, safe but clearly aboard the alien vessel. "How?" she demanded, fear and anger flaring in equal measure. "He contacted us," the ambassador said calmly. "Through the advocacy networks you've been using to share your family's story. Dr. Webb reached out to our Cultural Exchange Division 3 months ago, requesting a meeting to discuss what he called alternative models of social organization." Zara-TH stared at her husband in shock. "Marcus, what did you do?"